I'm not going into details of myself, and I don't want to introduce too much of myself. Being a retired assistant commissioner of the BKA, which is the German Federal Bureau of Crime, the central investigative agency, my police career covers a lot of policing areas, but was mainly focused on the investigation of politically motivated crimes. I had the chance in my professional life to learn about terrorist investigations from both angles, from the operational side and from the training side. And I was myself responsible on an executive level for a lot of transnational crime investigations myself. And the rest of my view you can read in the poster published for this lecture. Unfortunately, my own experiences in terrorist cases are a little out of date. So my statements are of a more general nature, which is anyhow very good for students that do not have any police experience themselves. On the other hand, talking about terrorist investigations, there are always a lot of details that have to be classified for many reasons, and it's quite difficult to reveal them in front of a big audience. But let me assure you, I am happy to answer any of your questions if you want to go into details, as long as it does not touch any classified material. Of course, my statements are very much focused on the German system of law enforcement, which, by the way, is much more close to your system than the Anglo-Saxon systems like in Australia or the United States of America or the UK. We have very much the same basis as the Dutch system, which was the basis of your system, is very close to our system. Nevertheless, I believe, although I focus on the German system, a lot can be generalized, as the main principles of prosecution and the challenges deriving from the legal system and the challenges deriving from the phenomenon of terrorism are similar throughout the world. At least this is my personal experience of having worked, as I said, in numerous cases of politically motivated crime with an international background. Let me start with a very criminological thing. Although, being a police officer, we always use a very practical criminology. We are not going so much in the academic backgrounds. That's why we are afraid to talk too much about definitions, for instance, because we have to use it. So we must find a practical way to talk about it. There is, to start this, no worldwide general definition of terrorism. The United Nations failed the last time to formulate a common definition of terrorism before the General Assembly in 2005, and the so-called ad hoc committee is still, and I'm talking about 2008, struggling with the definition. The European Union, in its Council Framework Decision of June 13 in 2002, defines a number of offenses that, committed with a certain motivation, are described as terrorist offenses. Many countries, on the other side, have their own specific national legal definition of terrorism. The reason for the non-existence of a UN definition until now are very obvious. And it can be described with the adage I write down over here: one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. The word that always has been used when you talk about terrorism. It has been used very much in the UK fight against the Northern Irish terrorism. And may I remind you that still in the 70s there were funds raised in the so-called NORAID for Irish terrorists in the United States. It was not forbidden. Today it's unthinkable, but there were times that the British government oftentimes wrote in a diplomatic way to the United States, can't you stop this fundraising for Irish terrorists? Because in a part of the US population, especially those having Irish background, Irish heritage, where you find a lot of them, they thought that Irish terrorists were freedom fighters. It often depends on the political position of a country to describe political motivated criminal as a freedom fighter or as a terrorist. Of course, the title freedom fighter is easily lost when the victims of the attacks are innocent civilians. But who is innocent and who is a civilian? Political representatives and law enforcement officers of the respective attacked government certainly will never get the attribute of being innocent. I'm not going to offer you an own definition, but to my own belief, there are some elements, at least 3 elements that characterize a crime as a terrorist act. One is, it must be a severe crime. Of course, murder, hostage-taking, bomb attacks, all these severe crimes can be looked upon as severe crimes, and it must be committed with a certain motivation. Let it be religious or politically motivated. And this is the 3rd element, the perpetrator must be a member of an organization. These elements are very important in my legal system, not to define terrorism. We have no legal definition of terrorism in Germany, but we have the definition of organized terrorist groups, which leads to certain privileges of law enforcement and which leads to certain special fines for being a member in such an organization without committing a crime yourself. Just forming such an organization or being a member in such an organization or even advertising for such an organization is a crime in our laws, which makes it sometimes easy when it is very difficult to find the actual perpetrator. Who killed? Who put the bomb down? You can get the organization with these organizational crimes. But there is no definition of terrorism itself.